Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, could you please find your seats and try and end your lunch conversations so that we can reconvene for the afternoon session. Our first item for this afternoon is the report of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel. And I'd like to invite its chair, Ms. Rosina Bierbaum, to present to us the report they have prepared, after which there will be time for questions and answers. Rosina, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, everyone. As you have come to expect, I wanted to start with a wonder of nature, which is not quite up yet. If you could put my slide up. Oh, there it is. So in honor of World Ocean Day, which was just last Saturday, I want to start with this picture of Sean the sheep nudibranch. I hope you all know what a nudibranch is, but just in case, it's a shell-less mollusk, part of the sea slug family, and it has some of the most fascinating shapes and colors and intricate patterns of any animal. And they've all been given colorful nicknames, too, to match their shape. There's more than 2,000 species. Most are found in shallow tropical waters. But this one, I hope those of you who have young kids think the face of this one looks like Sean the sheep. This one is unique because it belongs to a group of sea slugs that are the only organisms that can perform photosynthesis through a process called kleptoplasty. So you can all take this new word home with you. But what it means is that they can incorporate the chloroplast from the algae they feed on into their body, and then they're really solar powered. So it's pretty cool. And unlike terrestrial sheep, which contribute to climate change and can emit up to 30 liters of methane a day, these are solar. So just like the TV creation, which was by Nick Park, this Sean the sheep is probably known to many of you with young children, but this Sean the slug, nudibranch, is a charismatic critter. All right, now to the usual rogues gallery. This is my fellow STAP panel members. And on the bottom right, you see Ferenc Toth. He's our adaptation panel member. He's going to be leaving in October, so an announcement will be sent to the council shortly to recruit a successor. But I just want to bring it to your attention now so you can alert any of those with interest. And of course, as always, we need to canvass as widely as possible to get the very best scientists to apply. And in the audience today, we have two of the panel members, Blake Ratner, who I think is there, yes, and Salim Ali. So please feel free to talk to them during any of the breaks. All right, so what am I going to talk about today? New science and what it means for the GEF. STAP's work on the impact programs, 4 papers on durability or sustainability, climate risk screening, local commons for global benefits, and beginnings of guidelines on land degradation neutrality. And then I'll finish up with a quick look at STAP's work program and with some thoughts on the non-IP June GEF work program, in particular about how well we're doing on characterizing climate risk. Okay, so first on to science. This is the new global risk landscape from the World Economic Forum from 2019, the Global Risk Perception Survey. And you can see that all of the green diamonds, which are the environment issues, are in that upper right quadrant, meaning high risk and high likelihood. Not very good. So from the top right over, we go from extreme weather to failure of climate change mitigation and adaptation, then natural disasters, then biodiversity loss, and man-made environmental disasters. And actually, the red that's in that circle is also water crises. So I would say all of these green environmental issues and the water crises really sort of play out and round out a very difficult environmental future that we face. For those of you who were just at the lunch downstairs, we heard a real tour de force from Sir Bob Watson on the IPBES report, the International Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services report, IPBES. prepared by 145 scientists, 50 countries, and it provides an assessment of where the world stands with regard to international goals, including the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and it involves some 15,000 scientists and government sources. But very importantly, it also included a lot of indigenous knowledge and local knowledge. And Dr. Thomas Lovejoy, who was the STAP chair just before me, and he was a senior advisor now to me, he recently opined in an editorial on Science that the IPBES synthesis is today's report card and tells a short story. Eden is gone. While the planetary garden still exists, it is in deep disrepair, frayed and fragmented almost beyond recognition. So over lunch, Bob gave us 10 takeaway messages based on the IPBES global assessment. And I also want to say that Bob chaired IPBES, but Sandra Diaz, who you may all remember was a biodiversity panel member on STAP, was also a co-chair of IPBES. So the 10 messages are 1 million species at risk from extinction, and about 500,000 of those are plants and animals, and another 500,000 insects. The most important direct drivers since 1970 are land and sea use changes. Oh, I hear Sir Bob Watson is standing at the door, so we can all applaud him. Thank you, Bob. The direct drivers are land and sea use change, especially for terrestrial systems, exploitation, which is true especially for marine systems, climate change, pollution, and invasive alien species. But in the coming decades, climate change could become as important as land use change. As our production of food and fiber and energy has increased, most of what we would call the regulating services, that is kind of flood control, climate control, filtration of air and water, pollination, and the cultural contributions of nature are also declining. 75% of the land area has been significantly altered, 66% of the ocean is experiencing cumulative impacts, and 87% of wetland areas have been lost. And again, indigenous people and local communities play an important role in the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. They occupy something like 25% of the global land area and about 35% of protected areas, yet more than 70% of local biodiversity indicators show that there's decline and that there's lands under pressure. Moving on to the next several findings, most of the Aichi targets will be missed in most countries. A few are showing some progress. Continued loss of biodiversity, especially when coupled with human-induced climate change, threaten achieving most of the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, especially poverty, decreasing poverty, food and water security, human health, and the land and sea sustainability. Business as usual will show worsening loss of biodiversity. But nature-based solutions for climate change can be beneficial for biodiversity. So for example, if you're thinking of restoration with native species or reforestation, that can be good, but you have to be careful or it can be detrimental if, for example, you're using large-scale monocultures for afforestation or huge quantities of land for bioenergy that end up replacing native vegetation. And then their 10th conclusion is that transformative changes need a lot of things that go together, including government systems that are inclusive, evolving our economic systems to eliminate harmful subsidies, but to also be able to include natural capital, to recognize market and non-market and social values in decision-making, multi-sectoral planning, thinking across different areas of the government, incentives for sustainable production and consumption, thinking about the circular economy, which we've talked about in several council meetings, and certainly addressing inequities. So I would argue these conclusions are very much in sync with the new way the GEF is operating. We want to tackle drivers, we want to tackle barriers, we want to seek innovation and transformational change. But the IPBES report points out quite clearly the task is enormous. In other developments, the IPCC put out in May 2019 a refinement to their 2006 guidelines for greenhouse gas inventories. And this first one is really a methodology report, so it just refines the guidelines in a few areas. But there are some updates that I wanted to bring to the attention of the GEF. There are updates to the calculation of soil carbon uptake, for example, under land tillage management and under grassland management, and how to store carbon and measure stored carbon. Another area is updates to the baseline factors for really water management regimes before and after you plant rice. There's also updated guidance on estimating methane emissions from landfills under different solid waste management regimes. And then there's guidance on the estimation of methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide from the incineration and open waste burning. So that's been updated. But on black carbon, this 2019 refinement did not yet address the short-lived climate pollutants. But the IPCC did agree last month to develop methodologies for preparing emissions inventories for short-lived climate forcers like black carbon and other air pollutants. And you might recall that STAP produced a report on black carbon some time back where we encouraged the GEF to keep track of black carbon, even though we couldn't say exactly how to integrate black carbon into total greenhouse gas calculations. But now, thankfully, the IPCC will take this on, so stay tuned. Two other reports that are coming, one on climate change and land, that will be in August, and it will explore the feedbacks between land use and climate change. And then there will be another report focused on oceans in the cryosphere, or ice, as you know, in a changing climate, and we expect that out by September. So at the next council meeting, I should be able to report some of the main findings from these two very important reports and much needed assessments. Moving on, the Global Commission on Adaptation, as you recall, Naoko is a commissioner and I am an advisor. It met, the Global Commission met on May 21st, and some clear and fundamental messages are beginning to emerge from the Commission. First, as you see there, adaptation is about integrating climate risk right into growth and development, that they cannot be separate, and that adaptation, therefore, is about pursuing growth and development differently than in the past and better. Further, they're trying very hard to incorporate the economic case for adaptation because it is clear and compelling. And they're going to give lots of examples. Here I just give you three. They talk about disaster risk reduction. $1 in investment saves perhaps 6 in avoided costs. Nature-based solutions, how mangroves can be 2 to 5 times more cost-effective than some engineering solutions to protect infrastructure. And third, in the infrastructure itself, that upgrading it can have a benefit cost ratio of more than 4, and this is particularly in developing countries. So the Global Commission on Adaptation continues feverishly working, and it will produce a 50-page summary. That will be a high-level document for policymakers. It'll be unveiled at the UN General Assembly in September. I will certainly report it to you on it at our next council meeting, but it will also have a 150-page technical document, and that's based on some 30 papers that we commissioned and are reviewing, and that'll be delivered in time for the next conference of parties in November. And again, I would argue that the summary and these technical documents will complement GEF's work because in a number of areas, specifically nature-based solutions, cities, water, food, and the increased focus that they're going to put on knowledge, on innovation, on governance and finance. So these are all, I would argue, very much in sync with where we're trying to take the GEF. The Global Commission on Adaptation is going to meet again on the 9th and 10th of July, and more forthcoming at our next meeting. Another report that came out was the Global Chemical Outlook, and we were STAP served on the steering committee for this, and it was released just recently at the Conference of Parties to the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions. And the findings suggest that the GEF should continue, as it is now, to address the regulatory and the institutional gaps. And so, for example, the GEF should consider supporting projects that help countries adopt and reinforce the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, and also promote more integrated approaches to chemical and waste management. And there, I think you could actively look for chemical and waste angles in GEF projects and investments in other focal areas. So, for example, they might be possible to include in the IP, such as the Sustainable Cities or FLUOR. And the GEF has been actively working on improving its engagement with the private sector. And boy, chemicals and waste provide a significant opportunity to do this, given the substantial number of private sector organizations involved. And so finally, investing in projects that are focused on the life cycle and the circular economy continue to make sense, as we've discussed in previous meetings. All right, so let me now go on to the impact programs. The STAP panel members have all been heavily involved in reviewing and helping to refine the impact programs. And so what we did very early on was we developed 6 criteria and gave it to the GEFSEC and the agencies by which STAP would review the impact programs in ways that would help promote innovation, integration, transformation. And it builds on the work that we presented to you before on mainly at the Assembly, and specifically our integration paper, and also STAP's learning from having worked with the integrated approach pilots. So we were members of the committee which reviewed the expressions of interest, and we focused particularly on the science and technical side. We participated in the March workshop with the GEFSEC and the agencies. And then, of course, we screened the program and framework documents, and they were reviewed across all the panel members of the STAP. So why these 6 criteria? Well, transformation is likely to require, and I'm going to say this many times today, multiple forms of innovation. It can be technical, it can be financial, it can be business models, it can be policy, or it can be institutional innovation. But having more than one innovation happening simultaneously that's reinforcing is helpful. The second is that we really need to explicitly identify barriers to transformation. And again, those can be institutional, governance, cultural, or others, policy. And it will be important to identify relevant stakeholders to help design the appropriate engagement strategies to get around the barriers. You know, we always talk about multi-stakeholder processes. They're essential to address wanted and acceptable pathways to large-scale impact. And STAP has argued that these stakeholder pathways need to evolve and continue from the very development of the program or the project through implementation and beyond in order to get to sustainable or durable outcomes. And I think I missed maximize global environmental benefits. There, by improving efficiency and integration, you want to capture synergies and you want to minimize negative environmental impacts, and really importantly, manage the trade-offs, including, of course, climate risk, which we've been talking more and more about, and then the clear theory of change, which you have heard me go on and on about. There, you know, really clarifying the assumptions and the risks that underlie the pathway you intend to take, and be ready to manage adaptively if limitations occur. And finally, of course, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, one that tracks the innovations, the integration and transformation, one that enables learning, and it helps develop best practices both within the IP and then across the GEF partnership, and of course we hope beyond. All right, so those are the 6 we evaluate them against. Let's look at them in turn and see how the IPs did. And honestly, pretty well. So the first 2 are innovation and barriers to transformation. All of the IPs identified innovations of one sort or another, so that was great. On the other hand, some of them could have looked at a wider range of innovation types. Remember I said technology, policy, finance, institutions, reinforcing innovation can be helpful. And that's what the literature showed, and we did a broad review of the literature. And I think innovations to overcome cultural norms and barriers were less discussed. Let's move to the second one, barriers to transformation. Barriers were usually identified, but some of them could have been better explained and how they were going to get around them, and implications for the program design of those barriers was not always completely clear. Moving to the next 2, maximize GEBs and multi-stakeholder processes. Risks were usually well described. Good job on that on the IPs. But then explicitly addressing them, sometimes not so well done. So how are those trade-offs going to be managed? And what might those trade-offs mean for the actual design? On stakeholder engagement, great, usually good. On the other hand, as we think about child projects, we should be sure that we understand how the child projects are engaged with the global and the regional projects. And are there barriers to engagement? As we heard from the IPBES report, Indigenous peoples and local communities need to be involved. And when the global coordination project is developed, not yet done, we, STAP, suggest that maybe revisiting the theory of change to see if you need to add any additional stakeholders would be required. Then the last 2 STAP criteria, theory of change, monitoring, evaluation, learning. The theories of change were generally very strong on goals, where we want to get. Now, sometimes there wasn't as much as you would want on the causal links of how you're going to get to that point, or the feedback mechanism. So one thought we had here is that maybe having theories of change for the child projects and, for example, individual commodity value chains, such as coffee or cocoa, could help. And so we need to include pathways to deliver program goals and make sure the assumptions are spelled out. Monitoring, evaluation, and learning was absolutely central to every one of the IPs. That's wonderful. On the other hand, none of them listed metrics or indicators to monitor success. It's still early, but we would encourage that those happen. So I think, on the whole, STAP found that the IPs show real efforts to incorporate innovation, remove barriers, maximize global environmental benefits, relatively good theory of change, great multi-stakeholder processes, and a real focus on monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which I would say is a big change from where we were 5 years ago. All right, now I want to run quickly through 4 papers that we did for you. One on sustainability or durability, one on climate risk screening, one on local commons, and one on land degradation neutrality that's not yet finished. On sustainability or durability, as we're calling it, this was a response to the GEF Secretariat. And on climate screening, I spoke about that at the last several councils. The local commons for global benefits is the last of STAP's owed 8 papers to you from the Assembly. And then finally, we've been asked to help with the Convention to Combat Desertification, thinking about land degradation neutrality and how GEF can also do that too. So first on durability. Okay, why these cranes? Because they are a symbol of longevity or endurance. And we thought that was a fitting image for the goal of the GEF projects, programs, and long-term impacts. And so I mentioned, STAP was asked in our continuing role of bringing science into the GEF and to look at what the science literature has to say about sustainability. How can we ensure that a project or a program's impacts endure beyond the implementation stage? Well, it actually turns out there's an extensive literature on achieving project outcomes and impact. And increasingly, this literature says there are some success factors that are focused specifically on durability. And I'm using that word, recognizing it doesn't translate in all languages very well, but I'm using durability to avoid confusion with sustainable development and environmental sustainability, which can mean very different things to different people. So we actually looked at more than 75 analyses of project and program durability that you can find on our STAP website. So why do we think we need a focus on durability? Well, we seek bigger impact, and we seek to make sure those impacts endure. They need to persist in the face of long-term external changes, clearly like climate change, but there are many others. And so we've got to design these projects and programs to avoid or manage unintended consequences. There is a widespread assumption in the popular literature that scaling and transformational systems imply greater durability. You know, that may be true, but I think it's not a strict causal relationship. So we must scale for both systemic change, transformational change, broad impact, but we also need to deal and scale for durability or long-term impact. And I would argue these are two sides of a coin. The third is that larger investments don't necessarily guarantee transformational success, and it will not happen of its own. And so we would argue longevity must be built into the design. Fourth, transformation has to be also embedded in planning from the outset. And the literature notes that it might be necessary to consider additional financing after an initial investment, or it may require more innovation, or it may require more stakeholders. So this is not something that you can only look at the midterm review or after project completion, but actually from the beginning. Fourth, the systems change for transformation, again, requires innovation, and I've told you this 3 times now, which can occur in diverse ways, which is technological, financial, business model, policy, or institutional. And the transformational change, as the literature notes, is more likely to involve more than one of these types of innovation. And I think very importantly for us, we have to realize that greater innovation can increase the likelihood of higher failure rates. So the durability of outcomes must be examined from the project initial design. Now, I just want to take you through a few of these terms very quickly because it's very complicated. But as we know, GEF 7 investments are increasingly seeking greater integration, more innovation, and an expectation that they will deliver transformational change and consequently much more impact. So the green line is showing you the GEF investment phase during which outputs and outcomes should accrue. But the ultimate benefits on the right and the achievement of durable global environmental benefits sometimes might be after the lifetime of the program, that very right side of what was green turning to gray. So at the program level, there's an explicit intention to be integrated and to deliver transformational change across the program's portfolio of projects, even if every individual project does not scale in its own right. Okay, now projects, popping up below, should have similar outputs, outcomes, and impacts over time. So what should be our expectation? At the project level, the outcomes and impacts should at least occur within the geographic or organizational scope. But ideally, projects should also set up a pathway to scale so their local outcomes are taken up by other actors and in other places and truly contribute to transformational change. And again, this could require another round of innovation. Another way to look at this is with this little chart. So first, if you say want to think about the investment impact over time. So the first one here, the GEF investment green gets things going, but maybe the brown line, which is after the project ends, doesn't persist. Or we can look at other patterns. Here's a second one where the investment does persist. The brown line persists after the project levels. This one shows the project scaling to deliver more than local impact, but the scaling doesn't persist. On the other hand, as opposed to that one, this scaling continues to extend the impact long after the investment, and then this is the one we want, where several projects coordinate within a program, not only to scale, but to scale more than an individual project can. For example, where the projects manage to engage countries that supply all of a value chain, like coca, and can truly transform the behavior of the aggregator companies in a way that a single company couldn't have. And so, for example, this is what Falur is trying to do. I'd like to point out that I think this is a real question for the council. You need to decide on your appetite for risk. We want high impact, which is going up the x-axis, but systems change on the y-axis requires a lot of innovation, which often entails greater uncertainty with the possibility of higher failure compared to tried and trusted approaches. So this figure shows that we increasingly prefer to be in that upper right quadrant of high impact and high innovation. So you're moving from the lighter to the heavier shaded areas, but there will be some diversity across your portfolio, and I think that's desirable. But the bottom left is definitely where you don't want to be, low impact area, low innovation. And so some of these results come from the Independent Commission for Aid Impact, which emphasizes how important clearly demonstrated and articulated expectations about risk appetite must be across a program. I mean, I think STAP believes that the minimum expectation of any project is that it should deliver its expected outcomes and impact, and that those impacts should be enduring. Across a portfolio of projects, it might be reasonable to expect a modest project failure rate. The Independent Evaluation Office found that 80% of projects achieve satisfactory short to medium term outcomes, and that's greater than the, I think it was 75% target set in the GEF 4 replenishment, and that those were enduring in about 2/3 of the projects. So I think an acceptable risk appetite is really a matter for the GEF Council policy. You will have to help identify this appetite and your expectations. And it will be important to clarify expectations, because STAP believes if a project fails, it should be despite excellent project design and not because of design or implementation failures. And at the program level, we really do expect transformational outcomes. They might not accrue from every child project, but the program as a whole should have a very low probability of failure and target a high level of enduring impacts. By prioritizing innovation that explicitly aim at enduring transformational change, we do have to recognize that some efforts might fall short, but on average, those that do succeed will have more enduring impact at larger scale. So I think this is really very, very important food for thought for the council. In our recommendations on durability, we talked about how to improve integration in the design of the GEF project. And I want to just say there are common elements in our durability paper to the integration paper, and STAP is simply building on and extending recommendations we have brought to you before. So much of these are not really new, but they are really consistent with our 6 principles for screening of the IP, with our thoughts on climate risk, with our thoughts on integration. But the 2 new bits in this list of 8 are really the focus on long-term durability and the importance of the council deciding on its appetite for risk and consequent expectations, which you see is our first recommendation. The second one, applying systems thinking, is not new to you. A logical sequence of interventions, which is responsive to changing circumstances and new learning. We talked about that in both RAPTA and our integration paper. We talked about a clear rationale and theory of change in RAPTA and integration. We talked about the innovations that are intended to be scaled need to be carefully chosen and can, again, include those many categories ranging from technology to financial to business to policy, and that the intended modes of scaling should be described. This was written up in our innovation paper. Fifth is the analysis of barriers and enablers of transformation. This was written up in RAPTA. Maximizing global environmental benefits by improving integration, finding positive synergies among multiple benefits, and most importantly, avoid doing harm by minimizing negative interactions, including climate risk. And so we've talked about that in integration in RAPTA in our climate risk paper. The seventh, developing multi-stakeholder platforms, especially increasingly with local communities and not just government, from inception to design to project completion, building on existing platforms, and flexibly structured so that these stakeholder engagements can evolve over time so that you're going to get this enduring transformational change. And the eighth is, again, our monitoring, evaluation, learning, management process to actually track innovation, integration, transformation, and including regular review of that theory of change and the learning that has come during implementation. So those are our recommendations on sustainability or durability of program and project outcomes. For climate risk screening, the need to systematically identify and address climate and disaster-related risks was identified by STAP, and I have to say was recognized by the Council way back in 2010. So the new GEF Environment and Safeguards Policy does require short and long-term climate risks to be considered in screening, in assessment, and in planning processes. And the GEF SEC will be assessing GEF agencies against this policy between now and December. So you may recall that STAP issued guidelines for what it looks for in screening GEF projects last June, and in that we included a few questions on climate risk to get the agencies thinking about what in that project or program might be important to address. We did have a University of Maryland master's student, and Marcy, you can stand up and take a bow over in the corner here, or just wave your hand. And Marcy spent a year working with STAP and reviewed the methodologies used by the GEF agencies to screen for climate risk. And her analysis and now our conclusions indicate that current agency processes are actually quite variable, but they're trying. And a lot of agencies are in the process of revising their methods in anticipation of the new safeguards policy. So an explanation of this table: green is good, yellow is on the way, red is not adequate. And each number represents an agency going across. We took away the identification to protect the innocent, to spare any blushes, and because a lot of these are under review and revision. But basically, column 1 was noting if the agency had an approach to identify risk. Column 2 was considering if the approach if climate would affect the project's objectives. And column 3 was if they actually got to recommending ameliorative action to deal with the risk. And you see column 3 is where you see most of the reds, but 2/3 of the agencies have all greens and are practicing some form of serious risk screening. About 1/3 of the agencies did not respond or provided insufficient information to tell us whether they really had a robust screening mechanism. So this is just for illustrative purposes, not to point blame, but just to give you an example of where the agencies in climate risk screening are. So based on this, and for this council, we went back to the IPCC and the scientific literature in our earlier work, and we proposed that each agency at least go through a risk screening process that includes the 4 steps the IPCC calls on. 1, identify the hazards that may provide short-term shocks, such as extreme events, or long, slow onset chronic events, such as drought. 2nd, assess the vulnerability, the people, the livelihoods. 3rd, rate the risk according to some scale from very high to low, so you have a sense of whether this is really something that needs to be addressed. And then finally, identify measures to manage that risk based on that rating. Ameliorative actions can be strategies or policies, but you want to also confirm that the actions you're going to take do not themselves lead to additional risks. But I think the most important part of all of this is that assessing climate risk must be an integral part of design for a project or a program. It's not something that you can screen for after the project or program has been designed, when your options for coping with climate risk will be less. And many of the GEF agencies mentioned extreme events as a climate risk. But of course, there are many other climate change risks that could have impacts on GEF projects. So to help the agencies and GEF with this thinking, we went into the IPCC's Climate Change Special Report on global warming of 1.5 degrees and identified climate risks for each of the GEF focal areas and the IPs. And the impacts include some that are mentioned on this slide in water and chemicals, in Falur, and in the Amazon. And so there's a lot more listed in my council report and in the climate risk paper that's posted. So next steps on climate screening. Between June now and December, the agencies are going to assess their environment and social safeguards. And so STAP proposes to help with this, to organize a workshop to discuss climate risk screening methods so we can all exchange best practices and identify kind of a minimum idea of how to go forward with those 4 steps. And I promise that I will also report on climate risk screening with each work program we do at Council. The next paper, Local Comments for Global Benefits. Boy, the origin of this paper lay back in 2016 when there was a discussion at the International Dialogue on Global Commons, and it centered around this idea of local versus global action. As you know, and we've discussed actually already here and at lunch, a large proportion of the world's land area is managed by indigenous people and local communities, but governance is often quite weak. Many have no legally recognized tenure, and over 80% of this area doesn't actually have a robust governance basis. So that creates what we often call kind of open access. That means areas that are susceptible to uncontrollable and destructive exploitation, and that can be logging or wildlife trafficking or agricultural encroachment or hunting. So strengthening community rights to manage land and resources is, of course, a promising approach to deliver biodiversity, climate change mitigation, and land degradation goals. And that approach is, I would argue, particularly relevant for the IP Falur and for sustainable forest management's IPs, and also the GEF's diversity set-aside funds for inclusive conservation, and of course the small grants program. So we recommend that where GEF programs and projects involve land and resources used and managed by indigenous peoples and communities, we assess the extent to which the communities are present in that area and their rights and capacities to manage land and resources, that we be sure that the problem analysis pays particular attention to any institutional drivers such as insecure or unclear resource tenure, that we consider how shifting the rights or the incentives or the capacities for IPLCs could lead to transformational change. And there is an extensive literature on this which we reviewed, and it basically yields some fundamental design characteristics to guide these interventions which support community management. And they're listed in this last bullet. Again, support establishment of secure tenure rights, improve financial and non-financial benefits that communities can gain from using their wild resources, support inclusion, equity, and effective community governance, and very important, support inclusive governance at the high levels, but also the top-down and the bottom-up, including mechanisms for communities to exercise their voices in decisions that affect them. And last, our incomplete paper on land degradation neutrality. In 2015, the UN Convention to Combat Desertification introduced this concept, and it was adopted as Goal 15 of the Sustainable Development Goals, Life on Land. And so, as you know, the main goal of land degradation neutrality is to preserve the land resource base by ensuring no net loss of healthy and productive land. And that goal will be achieved through a combination of measures that avoid, reduce, and reverse land degradation. So far, 122 countries have committed to set LDN targets, and GEF is supporting countries on LDN. So the final guidelines will provide practical help to those developing projects and a focus for helping to lay the foundations necessary to achieve land degradation neutrality through policies, through integrated land use planning, and also any preparatory assessments. So these guidelines will be presented, they will be relevant to fleur and drylands, and the final version will be presented to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification, and I think that's COP14 in Delhi in September. So I just wanted to mention it because this will happen before I see you again. All right, quickly on STAP's work program, several things on our plate I've just mentioned, continuing to work on the LDN guidelines. In addition, we're going to have an advisory document to help guide practitioners to incorporate Earth observations and other spatial data into applicable programs and projects. And that may include a primer on remote sensing and geographic information systems. We'll give you some case studies. We'll give you information on how to access data from relevant platforms. Then following on our work on novel entities, we're going to have a workshop on harnessing the benefits of blockchain for the delivery of global environmental benefits. And so we'll be thinking about how blockchain can be brought to the work of the GEF and how it can harness the opportunities from this technology. And I hope that you might have noticed, if you made it to the end of my council report, that we are also, STAP is doing more publishing and outreach, which has always been the other part of STAP's role, not just to bring science to the GEF, but to take back to the scientific community the needs and findings of the GEF. And so we are publishing a paper based on our novel entities. We published a special edition on commodity agriculture, and we're doing lots of talks to the academic community about how to bring these two worlds together. Certainly, we'll all have to think about the implications of the Global Commission on Adaptation for GEF's work, and we will continue to think hard about more practical advice on refining theories of change and how to actually do multi-stakeholder processes better. So that's kind of what's on our paper written generally. And I want to just give some comments lastly on the June work program. It was a bumper program, $866 million, the biggest ever. So as I've already told you, we were heavily invested in the new IPs, Fleur, Drylands, Congo, and Amazon, and then in the other three programs, Global Wildlife, E-Mobility, and implementing sustainable and low non-chemical developments in SIDS. We screened 35 other projects. 12 were LDCF, 4 biodiversity, 3 climate mitigation, 3 international water, 3 chemicals and waste. And looking through a climate lens, we had some particular thoughts on these, which is what I'm showing you on this slide. So definitely more attention to climate risk. That glass is half full. But some examples we wanted to raise. Certainly, if a project is listed in a coastal area, it should talk about the implications of sea level rise. Or if a project's in a disaster-prone region, it should certainly consider how the project outcomes could be designed to withstand extreme events. And it should go beyond language like changing rainfall, drought, and rising temperature will increase. So clearly we have a little more to do, but the awareness has been raised and there is progress. And as I mentioned, we look forward to working with the GEF and the agencies to strengthen climate risk screening, and to that end, the workshop that I mentioned to discuss screening methods and best practices. And again, I will report on climate screening at each work program. All right, you've made it. So, last but not least, let me leave you with this critter, which is a male peacock spider from Australia. They were first discovered in the 1800s. You can see why they're called peacock spiders. There's many, many fun facts about these small but tenacious and, dare I say, durable spiders. They are about the size of a pencil eraser, and like all spiders, they are venomous, but not to humans. And when they need to, they can handle something up to 4 times their size. So I want to end with this peacock spider because we hope GEF has similar clout and impact in terms of leveraging their size more than 4 times, if not 400 times, and to build global environmental benefits across all its projects and programs. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosina, for such an engaging presentation. We started with Shaun the Sheep, and I think Marvel has to think up a comic figure that resembles the peacock spider. I wanted to open the floor for comments and questions from the room. Please raise your flag. First I see is Cordula, please.
Well, thank you, Rosina. It's always very entertaining, and this is probably why they always put you after lunch, because you are in a position to keep us from falling asleep. And I think, well, this time I think that you are actually treating very relevant questions for the GEF. With the questions you raised on the IPs and the accompaniment that you are doing on this, with the question of climate risk and how it's being dealt with within the GEF, and with the question of durability, which was one of the issues that was raised a lot during GEF 7. And somehow I'm wondering how your very interesting and relevant findings are going to trickle not too slowly into the GEF programming. Because what you described about you accompanying the IPs and the positive and the negative aspects, I felt there was still a long way to go. And we are now commissioning these IPs, I think most of them at this meeting. And how are we going to follow up on the negative sides that you still saw when you were looking at the programs, the program documents? Same for durability. There was a lot of interesting findings. Well, you played the ball back to the council and said we need to say how much is the risk appetite, but I don't think it's only this. There was a lot of issues about durability that you were raising, and that should go into the project design, really. And the project only reaches once they are designed, and then we may still say, well, this is the risk we want to take, and this is the risk we don't want to take. But this needs to be inbuilt in the proposal, though, that we can actually have something to decide on. And, well, last but not least, I think the climate risk screening is a very important issue. And well, the colors on the agencies show that there's still a lot to be done, and I don't think we should wait too long to have this done. We shouldn't wait until we do GEF 8, but it's just a question how all this very valuable work you do, how we as a council can help you to get this into concrete action within our work programs in short notice.
Thank you, Cordula. Next in line is Marita, please. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to STAP for providing, as usual, a very interesting and stimulating report, and also thank you for the important role that you play for the scientific quality of the work of the GEF. And I think the themes that you presented are very valuable, important to our work. We had some questions on your paper on durability, because we were struggling a little bit with that, and I just wanted to hear your views, because for us, GEF is in the business of sustainable development, and we want everything GEF does should contribute to sustainable development. So for us, when we address sustainability, which is very important, and we noted that the numbers had decreased also in the APMR, so this is of a very big importance to us. But when we address this concept, we both think about durability and that projects should contribute to sustainable development. So for us, it was difficult to distinguish, to de-link the two. So it would be interesting to hear if you could elaborate a little bit more about your thinking on that. And also, because you said that the sustainable project doesn't necessarily, a durable project doesn't necessarily contribute to sustainable development. But if you could say a little bit more about your rationale for establishing this separate concept. Thank you.
Thank you, Marita. Elizabeth is next, and then we move to Jan Petter.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and thanks to you, Rosina, and the remainder of the staff for the work that you do, and for bringing this kind of thinking and insight and some really beautiful conceptual figures to the Council. We very much appreciated this report. I just wanted to second Cordula's points, particularly on the question of durability, and how and when and where these ideas might be incorporated into programming, and how Council can support this moving forward. Because we thought that the analysis here, particularly of intensity and durability of impact and the framework for emergent indicators of enduring outcomes that you put together as they relate to design and to implementation, as well as the specific recommendations to be incorporated into project design, were really quite useful, and also secondarily very complementary to the IEO's ideas about their framework for indicators for scaling. So we thought that those two ideas could be worked together a bit in concert if we wanted to move forward with them, and we were just hoping you could share with us any ideas about clear next steps, either for GEF 7 or moving into GEF 8. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan Petter is next, and then Ben.
Sorry. Yes, we thank the chairperson of the STAP for this interesting report and the documents. And also, like others, we believe STAP to provide extremely important inputs to the Council. But first, let us note that some of these documents were published very recently, and they are quite information heavy. So if the Council is to use them in a serious manner, we need to receive them a bit earlier to be able to prepare. So we may have to go to revisit some of the issues presented for us today. Our main focus today will be on climate risk screening, elaborated in INF 3. Our constituency appreciates very much that the STAP is now approaching climate risk screening and risk management in the GEF portfolio in a systematic manner. The starting point is that GEF investments are increasingly exposed to such risks. We note with concern the findings that such systematic screening has been missing to a large extent, and that practices of GEF agencies are not consistent. We have looked with interest at examples of climate risks provided in Chapter 4 of that document, including shift of biogeographical ranges of organisms, ecosystems, increased bioavailability for certain crops, forest dieback, etc. And for the follower program, the risk of even drastic decreases in certain kinds of food production is mentioned. And this brings us to a natural question in this point of time, is whether the GEF programs now initiated have developed effective strategies for ameliorating these serious threats to the sustainable delivery of global environmental benefits. We note that the STAP in its main report in Table 1, when analyzing the follower program, sends a signal that, and now I quote, implications of long-term drivers, e.g. the impact of climate change on certain crops, would be useful. Some of you may remember that this delegation has raised precisely this issue on numerous occasions in Council meetings earlier. We therefore support the next steps suggested in the document, in particular increased responsibility for agencies and the Secretariat and CEO to ensure sufficiently precise climate risk screening, as well as appropriate plans to manage and ameliorate such risks. As pointed out in the report, measures are needed not only to ensure good outcomes during the program period, but also to provide climate resilience and sustainability over time. We also appreciate very much what we just heard from you now, Dr. Bierbaum, that STAP will provide climate risk information for each work program. Finally, a couple of comments on other STAP studies. In 05 document on local commons, we realized that these are complex issues, also politically, but the issue of governance vacuum in these areas is a serious challenge, and we broadly support the recommendations. The INF4 document on enduring outcomes also contains sensible recommendations, although also, as said by Sweden, we may need to look at some of the definitions. This document presents some uncomfortable challenges, like one example being that there may be no strict relationship between laudable goals like scaling up, transformational change, and durability. This document in particular is quite rich, and it may be necessary for the Council to revisit some of the issues presented. We have not had time to go thoroughly through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. We move to Ben, and after that to civil society, please.
Many thanks. And also just a quick comment and a question. Firstly, to say, though, thank you very much for the great and very clear presentation. I've never been to one of these before, but it was certainly really useful. And I think it's going to have implications as well for some of the subsequent items we consider in this council session, particularly on things like transformation, durability, which has been discussed by others, the appetite for risk, and obviously land degradation and tenure, and some of those issues are very important to consider. But I guess the question, just building on the comment made from Norway, I mean, you raised the question about that the Council needs to consider its risk appetite. So it'd be useful to get some sort of sense about how GEF overall is considering its risk appetite. And is there a particular role for the GEF Secretariat or the IEO perhaps to look beyond just a project-by-project basis and start to think about how this becomes aggregated? So it would be useful to get maybe your views on what the next steps on that might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Next speaker, civil society, and then Marta.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair. And thank you, Rosina, for that superb presentation. And a number of council members have mentioned durability, and you made a very good point with durability. And the CSO network gives utmost importance to this aspect. CSOs tend to have long durability. They last a long time, very often in changing political landscapes. And therefore, we cannot emphasize enough the importance of engaging the CSO network in all projects, not just the small grants program, but full size, medium size, and all GF programs. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Marta is the next speaker, and then Stefan.
Gracias, copresidenta, y gracias, Rosina. Thank you, co-chair, And thank you, Rosina, for this rich and interesting presentation. We are going to read it in detail, and we will make our comments as our group. Our group would like to congratulate you for your election to the National Academy of Science of the U.S. And in terms of STAP, your work is very valuable because of the contributions for the evaluation of projects before their approval. Also, in terms of new entities, it's important to remember that a lot of these concepts are being discussed in other international fora, and often there is no consensual definition. And I am going to give the phone to the representative of Argentina that would like to make an intervention.
Gracias, Marta. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you. And congratulations to Rosina for her election. On behalf of Argentina, we have read and we are considering especially the document on novel entities. And it would be very important for us to understand how it is these issues that are so important are related or could be related to specific GEF policies, because these issues in many cases are controversial and there are no agreed upon definitions. They're being negotiated in other scenarios, in other fora. Therefore, it would be very important to understand how it is that the way in which the Council and the GEF management can consider them. Thank you.
Thank you both. We're now moving to Stefan and then Marjolein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, the Chair of STAP and the members of STAP for this, as usual, very rich document. It contains a wealth of information and also some more concerning finding, like the fact that climate risks are not really included systematically yet. With that, we join others that are asking about the follow-up action. You know, we receive these documents as INF documents. There's no decision of a follow-up action, yet we see a very good complementarity between some of the reports that come from STAP and work of the Independent Evaluation Office. Things like durability, scalability, how do we handle risks. So my question is also the one that was raised by colleagues, saying how do we go about it, that this is not just considered as a very interesting and insightful and solid piece of work, but that it's made actionable as soon as possible. And I believe the Council is ready to take appropriate risks, but we want to see that findings like the ones of STAP are then also built into the operation. And in that respect, I have a specific question regarding the child projects of the impact programs. To what extent is STAP looking at those and commenting on those? Because as we mentioned several times, we very much, I wouldn't say rely, but we definitely take positions that are expressed by STAP as something very serious for us, because we do not have the resources to look and the capacities and the knowledge to look in depth at all the projects. So what's the role of STAP with regards to child projects? What's the next steps regarding some of the findings of these reports? And perhaps a more exotic question at the end. I don't know if it's the right place. MOPAN, the evaluation that I think we will have the pleasure of hearing about tomorrow over lunch, came to a conclusion that STAP does not have, what did they say, sufficient or appropriate representation of social scientists. What is your thinking on your end also, because in the broader GEF family we are starting to develop or build up, establish other kind of advisory panels and experts that are more down the financial, economic and social science alley. So you may have competition in the future, though I doubt that they will be able to show us as fascinating creatures that are out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefan. Last speaker in this round, Marjolein.
Thank you, and I would like to join others in thanking the STAP for this extensive and very valuable report. And I think that Stefan has just said about everything I wanted to say as well. And we, especially in the follow-up, we would be very interested in hearing on both on the climate risk screening and the durability of projects, which we will discuss later this afternoon, or it's the next agenda item even. On how you would propose to follow up on the recommendations, both from the GEF Secretariat in the designing of the work program, but also on how we from Council can play a role on that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to give the floor to Rosina to respond and also to Nook.
All right, thank you very much. Let me try to do justice to these very wide-ranging but important questions. First, on Germany, durability, IPs, good, bad, how to, I think you even used the word fix the IPs. I think STAP is not saying the IPs are broken. I think STAP is saying the IPs are showing more good than they certainly could have in the IAP world or whatever. But reflecting Stefan's comment, the Council's decision was that the program documents would be reviewed and not the project documents. And so STAP wanted to be sure that we're really helping with this enormous, the biggest work program ever, to get as much in place and set out some of the things that we think are really important to make sure they're integrated, they're durable, they're innovative, they could scale. And so that is actually why we put so much time in. And if you look into the individual screens of the IPs, you know, we'll give you example of what we thought was really innovative in Falur or Drylands or Amazon in each of those 6 criteria that we were asking for. So in fact, we put so much time into prepare for that which will yet follow, the coordination projects, all of the child projects. But technically, to answer Stefan's question, the child projects do not necessarily come through the STAP. Of course, we're willing to review anything that you want us to. So we felt it was very important to get as much guidance out there to you as we could on what the peer-reviewed literature said, to make sure that that which follows will in fact be not just durable but innovative and scalable. I'm not quite sure, Sweden, on the durability question. I do think of sustainability and durability as synonyms, and the Sustainable Development Goals as seeking to improve sustainability. But the literature was very, very confused on this, the peer-reviewed literature and some of the gray literature. And so when we really wanted to look at projects whose outcomes persisted, sustainability goals and the word sustainability was not a useful search term. And so we just wanted to define that STAP's question, which had come from the GEF, is how can we ensure better that our project design and program design will persist beyond the time of the funding, which is a very important question. And so that's really why we chose that term, to mean that narrower persistence of the outcomes, outputs, and global environmental benefits, which of course we're all trying to meet: the Sustainable Development Goals, the Aichi targets, and the Millennium, the multilateral environmental agreements. On the U.S. question of how and where to do this, I think, again, everything I've said today is simply both an evolution and an augmentation of the kinds of things we as the GEF family have been thinking about at Council for years, refinements of theories of change. How do you think about systems thinking? How do you think about global environmental benefits, stakeholders, who, when, what, where, why? How do you actually monitor and evaluate learning? But this risk tolerance, I think is something that's been bubbling just below the surface at several last council meetings. And if we really want to have impact and we really want to scale up, a 60-something% rate of success in a business would be really good. But I don't know that we have a common understanding among ourselves of what we think durable and success should look like. So the STAP is absolutely willing to work with GEFSEC, to work with the IEO, to work with the council, to work with the agencies, to try to make sure that some of these principles that we laid out for durability actually get incorporated into the next phases, such as the coordination project and the child projects. I note Norway commenting on how late some of these papers and our screens were posted. I do want to say, though, again, it was the biggest work program ever. And we did receive everything on May 8th, and we posted everything on May 31st. So it was 3 weeks, but it was very close to where we are now. So we do apologize for that. On the risk screening, we thought of because there's so much diversity in the agencies of what they're using. Many are using a screening tool, not many using too much data. We thought putting out there where these tools are and where you can find data would be helpful. But we really do mean we would love to convene the agencies, because I know that the World Bank is revising their screening tool. In the U.S. government, the Agency for International Development is, and at least 6 of the agencies that were on that red, green, yellow chart are also in a deep think of how do you do it better but not take so much time up front that the perfect is the enemy of the good enough to begin to do the project and get the money flowing. So it's a real trick of, have you thought through these risks and have you a way to cope with them? And so that's really what we are trying to do. Let me see, what was the UK's question about transformation, durability, risk? I think it was it more on... Oh, how do we get the risk appetite? Well, you would be the council. I mean, I do think that's something that we should have some common understanding of. I don't know how many council meetings ago, I think there was some criticism that GEF wasn't taking enough risk and that we were doing, quote, cookie cutter projects on mitigation. Well, okay, if you want to do something that's demonstrating innovation that somebody else can scale up, and there are other entities that can do that, what is it that you would like to see and what is it that you would tolerate? So I do think this has kind of been bubbling below the surface for a while, as I say, and that we really do need to have a conversation with it. And I'm not sure how council wants to do it, but of course, if STAP can help, we would be very happy to. The CSO argument about you are around for a long time, engage us, absolutely. I mean, this whole issue of which stakeholders, where, who knows the local communities, who has the trust of the local communities, and how do you have stakeholders at the policy level and the local level is quite clear. The CSO communities can do a lot with that. Thank you, Peru and Argentina, for your congratulations. And you're completely right that a lot of these topics that I'm bringing to you are discussed in other fora, and that's in part why we're trying to synthesize it for you and say, this is what we see in the scientific literature and the gray literature as some common definitions and some common ways to head towards these endpoints that we're talking about. On the novel entities, which I think was Argentina, we just laid out for the GEF how some of these things, like rare earth mining, which tends to happen in poorer countries and can have terrible environmental impacts, but is essential for the next generation of clean energy, how the GEF needs to think about it as it's putting together projects that may address either waste or mitigation. But similarly, you know, the new genetic techniques which could build nutritional value into crops, but it's gene editing. I mean, these kind of issues are going to come forward in GEF projects and programs in the future. And so our main point there was to say, here are some signposts you're going to have to think about. We see these in the 1 to 5 year range. They're going to be coming down in projects and potentially the programs and the IPs, and you need to take stock of that. So blockchain is the one that we were urged by the agencies and by GEFSEC to actually hold a deeper workshop on to see how that may influence near-term work of the GEF. But again, on all of the novel entities, you know, that was part of our horizon scanning for you. What's going to come that the GEF is going to have to think about as it designs projects, and if you don't think about them, there are risks. You may forgo opportunities, but you may also risk additional environmental impacts. So Stefan's point that climate risk is not systematized yet, no, but compared to 5 years ago, people are thinking about it, and people are applying tools, and there's a profusion, if anything, of tools. There's too many tools out there, frankly, but there are places where you can find good data, and again, that's why we thought bringing this to you, bringing what the IPCC says, and then offering to hold this workshop in conjunction with the GEF or in sequence, however works best, would be important. But again, coming back to my first point, if all these child projects are going to be developed for the IPs, we want to make sure that climate risk is considered as the projects are developed, because as Bob Watson said at lunch, you can't think about any topic without thinking about climate change, and you certainly need to increasingly think about biodiversity and climate change together. On the social science piece of the STAP, I actually would say that one of the reasons that we brought Salim Ali and Blake Ratner, the two members who are here today, as well as Mark Stafford Smith, who's a special advisor, and Ferenc Toth, is because while they are deep in the areas they're covering, they're also very broad and have had an unusual amount of experience, both with social science issues and with business. And so, you know, STAP has thought about, should we have somebody dedicated to social science as one of our folks? And at least to date, our thought has been, but council can advise differently, that the better we get people who are both deep in an area that we need and broad and stretch across areas, including social science and economics, et cetera, the better we will be to advise on increasing integration, innovation, transformation. And then I think last, again, the question on follow-up to climate risk and durability. We're happy to do it in any way that makes sense, to help with the child projects, if that's useful for the agencies, in the design of the coordination project, and the helping to think through of metrics and indicators. So, you know, STAP is at your disposal, but we felt, again, since the programs are the only thing we're required to review at this point, getting all that which is very good out and that which should be continued to be worked on out was important for this council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, very helpful, Rosina. Please now go.
Thank you, Karura. We at the Secretariat too would like to thank Rosina and the STAP for your fullest service or the high quality service to us. And when we think about our journey from GEF 2020, from integration to transformation to multi-stakeholder and the platform and the theory of change, I don't think that we could have this journey without support from the STAP. So that then I am absolutely thankful for you, Rosina, and your team. And the one really good thing is that then you always kind of table us the risk map, that then higher impacts, but then also innovation and how much risk we should undertake. And that kind of guiding is absolutely critical for our journey and also for us moving forward. I hear the several questions that, okay, what's next? And we received a kind of good comments from staff that plus point, but also the kind of negative point. And then how do we want to handle that? So on that one, I do understand that yes, that you screen everything, and then we have received the comments, and the comments are actually sent to the agencies, and we have been working. We will be working on that, and then, so the next few months actually, we will be very busy to reflect those comments and to improve the quality of the project. So before they come back to you, as to us, that for endorsement, and our role is to work with you, the staff, but then with the agencies to make sure that those comments are really well reflected. One thing I just also like to mention is that my understanding is that among all the projects and the program you screen, in fact, the impact programs are rated higher than other things. So it's not necessarily you are very surprised, and maybe I'm surprised too, that and see a lot of plus and minus, but it's a kind of full transparency and a very rigor analysis. But then maybe that we could also take it as a kind of, that in a balanced way, so that then these are kind of, well balanced narrating, and I'm very happy to hear that the impact program are actually rated higher, so we could go ahead and with that and thinking about how to reflect those comments, so that then just going forward, again that when that after work program be hopefully approved, and we will have the full-fledged the journey again to with you, and how to really reflect those comments, and how we could ensure that we are together with the agency and the countries to improve the quality of the design of the program. I think that a program and the project, that's a kind of way forward. That would be my take and my commitment to this council. So let me stop here.
Thank you, Naoko. If there are no further comments, this then concludes this agenda item for today. And I'm going to quickly hand back to Naoko, not at least because I noticed that as soon as you let me chair, we start running severely behind schedule.
No, because the session was so rich, and that's why.